I still remember the exact moment I understood I was a ghost in my own love story. It was a Tuesday in November, the kind of gray afternoon that makes the city look like a black and white photograph. Julian was on the phone with a journalist from Rolling Stone, and I was sitting 3 feet away, stirring a soup I had made from a recipe my grandmother had taught me. The journalist asked about the lyrics to Julian's latest single, the one that had just gone platinum, the one that was being called the love song of the generation. Julian laughed, that low, warm laugh that made strangers trust him instantly, and he said, "I wrote it in a single night." I was alone, and I was thinking about how love is the only thing that makes solitude bearable. I looked down at the notebook on the kitchen counter, the notebook where I had written those exact lyrics 3 months earlier, at 2 a.m., while Julian slept in the next room. I had given it to him as a gift, a collection of poems I called Solitude and Other Lies. He had kissed my forehead and said they were beautiful. He had never mentioned them again, and now he was telling a journalist and soon the world that they were his. I did not confront him. I did not stand up and claim what was mine. I stirred the soup, and I listened to him perform my words as his own, and I told myself that this was what love looked like. Love was giving. Love was disappearing so the other person could exist more fully. Love was being the ink that made someone else's signature possible. Welcome to Little Bunny Stories. If you are new here, my name is Simone, and what I am about to tell you is a story about the muse who learned too late that she was not being worshipped. She was being consumed. If you have ever loved someone who needed you to be invisible so they could shine, stay with me. Hit that subscribe button, turn on your notifications, and listen until the end, because this story does not end with justice. It ends with a microphone, a small crowd, and the first note of a song that finally belongs to me. Here is my story. I met Julian when I was 22 and he was 24. I was working as a barista in a coffee shop near the music school where he was studying composition. He came in every morning at 7:30, ordered a black coffee, and sat in the corner with headphones that leaked piano melodies. I noticed him because he was beautiful in the way that artists are beautiful, the kind of beauty that makes you think he must be seeing something in the world that you are not. I noticed him because he looked lonely, and I had been trained from childhood to believe that loneliness was a call I was obligated to answer. My mother had been a ghost too. She had cooked my father's meals, typed his business letters, raised his children, and died at 56 of a heart attack that the doctors said was stress-related, but I knew was invisibility-related. She had simply faded until there was not enough of her left to keep her heart beating. I grew up watching her disappear, and I learned that the highest form of love was the kind that left no trace. So when Julian started talking to me, when he asked about the book I was reading behind the counter, when he told me that my smile reminded him of a chord progression he had been trying to capture, I felt the familiar pull. The pull to be useful. The pull to be seen by being unseen. The pull to become the background against which someone else's masterpiece could emerge. We moved in together 6 months later. A loft in Brooklyn with exposed brick and windows that let in too much light in the morning. Julian needed the light, he said, for his work. I bought blackout curtains for the bedroom and learned to sleep through the sound of him composing at 3 a.m. I learned to cook meals that could be eaten cold because he forgot to come to the table when he was working. I learned to clean around the sheet music that covered every surface, to never move a notebook, to never disturb the careful chaos of his creative process. And I wrote, not music. I had no training in music, but words had always been my instrument, the way I made sense of a world that had taught me my own insignificance. I wrote poems in the margins of receipts while I waited for Julian at restaurants. I wrote lyrics on napkins during the concerts where I sat in the back while he sat in the green room. I wrote letters to him that I never sent, letters that became songs, songs that became the soundtrack of our life together, even though he never knew they were songs. The first time I gave him my words, it was an accident. He was stuck on a melody, frustrated, throwing crumpled sheet music across the room. I was washing dishes and I started humming something, a line that had come to me that morning while I watched him sleep. He stopped. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "What was that?" he asked. I sang it again, self-conscious, my voice small in the vast loft. He grabbed his guitar. He played. He changed a word here, a rhythm there, and by midnight he had a song. He played it for me, his eyes bright, and he said, "I think this is the best thing I have ever written." I did not correct him. I did not say, "Those are my words." I said, "I am glad you like it." And I felt a warmth that I mistook for love, the warmth of being useful, the warmth of being the source of someone else's light. That became our pattern. I would write, he would compose, the songs would become his name on the credits, his face on the album covers, his interviews where he talked about his creative process, his inspiration, his solitary genius. I was never mentioned, not because he forgot, because mentioning me would have required acknowledging that the genius was not entirely his. And Julian's brand, his carefully constructed image, depended on the myth of the lone artist, the tortured soul who created beauty from his own isolation. I told myself it did not matter. I told myself that art was collaboration, that love was sacrifice, that my contribution was its own reward. I told myself these things so many times that they became a kind of prayer, a mantra I repeated when I woke up alone in bed because he was still working, when I ate dinner alone because he had a meeting, when I sat in the audience at his concerts and watched strangers scream his name while the words they screamed were mine. For 8 years, I lived in the shadow of his spotlight. I was the girlfriend, then the partner, then the woman he lived with but never married. He said marriage was a bourgeois institution that stifled creativity. I knew the truth. Marriage would have required legal acknowledgement of my existence. It would have meant sharing assets, sharing credit, sharing the stage. And Julian did not share stages. I wrote the lyrics to his first Grammy-nominated album. I wrote the love song that became our generation's wedding anthem. I wrote the breakup ballad that critics called his most vulnerable work, even though we had not broken up, even though the vulnerability was mine, the story of my father's abandonment rewritten as his own. I wrote them all in notebooks with covers he never looked at, in documents on a laptop he thought was his, in the margins of my own skin where no one could see. And then, at 29, Julian met Blair. She was a model or an influencer, or both. The categories had blurred by then into a single profession of being beautiful and visible. She appeared in the background of a music video, a face in a crowd that the director had chosen for her bone structure. Julian saw her. Julian wanted her. Julian told me, with the same gentle tone he used when he was explaining why my lyrics needed to be rewritten, that he needed space, that he was feeling stagnant. That Blair represented something he had been missing, something light and uncomplicated, something that did not require him to be deep. I moved out of the loft. I found an apartment the size of a closet in a neighborhood where the subway did not run. I continued to write for him, not because he asked, because I did not know how to stop, because the words still came and the only person I had ever given them to was him, because I still believed, in some part of myself that I could not silence, that if I gave him enough of my soul, he would eventually realize it was me he needed, not her. He did not realize. He moved Blair into the loft. He photographed her in my kitchen, cooking meals I had taught him to love, wearing my old sweaters that she had found in a drawer and claimed as vintage. He wrote songs about her, or rather, he took the songs I sent him and changed the name. The love song of the generation became a love song for Blair. The wedding anthem became their story. And I, in my closet apartment, listened to my own words being sung to another woman and told myself that this was what art meant. That once you gave it away, it was no longer yours. 3 months after Blair moved in, Julian died. It was a motorcycle accident, the kind of death that seems inevitable in retrospect, the reckless speed of a man who had never been told no. He was 30. He was on his way home from a party where he had performed a new song, one I had written the week before, one he had dedicated to Blair from the stage while I watched the livestream on my phone. He took a curve too fast. He hit a guardrail. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. I found out from a text message. Not from Blair, not from his manager. From a news alert that appeared on my phone while I was making tea, the same tea I had made for him every morning for 8 years. Julian Harlow, acclaimed composer, dead at 30. And then, because the algorithm knew my patterns, because I had searched his name so many times in the dark hours of the night, a second alert. Blair Kensington, Julian Harlow's fiancé, devastated by loss. Fiancé, they had been engaged. For 2 weeks, according to the articles. He had proposed with a ring I recognized, a vintage piece he had shown me once and said he would buy for me someday when he was ready, when the time was right. He had bought it for her. He had been ready for her. The time had been right for her. I did not go to the funeral. I was not invited. I watched it on a live stream, the same way I had watched his concerts from the back row of the internet where no one could see me. Blair was there in black, her face a perfect mask of grief that she had probably practiced in a mirror. She was surrounded by celebrities, by musicians, by the industry people who had always known Julian but had never known me. She gave a speech. She called him the love of her life. She said they had been planning their wedding, planning their future, planning a family. She did not mention that 2 months earlier, he had been sleeping in my bed, eating my cooking, singing my words. And then, because the world loves a narrative more than it loves truth, Blair became the widow. The tragic widow. The beautiful young woman who had lost her great love before their story could begin. She started an Instagram account dedicated to his memory. She posted photos of them together, photos I had not known existed, photos where she wore my sweaters, and cooked in my kitchen, and smiled at a camera Julian had bought with money from songs I had written. She started a foundation in his name. She organized tribute concerts. She sold merchandise with his face and hers together, the eternal lovers separated by cruel fate. She also inherited everything: the loft, the studio, the rights to his music, the publishing deal, the brand. Because Julian had never married me, because he had never put my name on anything, because he had never acknowledged my existence in any legal or public way, I had no claim. I was not the widow. I was not the ex. I was not even the collaborator, because collaboration requires acknowledgement, and acknowledgement was the one thing Julian had never given me. I was nothing. And Blair, who had known him for 6 months, who had never written a word he sang, who had never sat up with him through a night of creative doubt, who had never learned to sleep through the sound of his piano at 3 a.m., became the guardian of his legacy, keeper of his flame, the woman who would decide how the world remembered him. For 2 years, I watched her build her empire. I watched her publish love letters he had supposedly written to her, letters I recognized as fragments of poems I had written for him, rewritten in his handwriting by a forger she had probably hired. I watched her give interviews about their creative partnership, how she had inspired his greatest work, how their love had been the source of his genius. I watched her become the expert on Julian Harlow, the woman who had known him best, the widow who would ensure his memory lived on, and I watched myself disappear. Not physically. I was still alive, still working, still existing in the margins of a world that had never known my name. But the parts of me that had been in his music, the words I had given him, the love I had poured into his career, were being erased. Reattributed, rewritten as the product of a dead man's genius and a widow's inspiration. I was being written out of my own life, and there was nothing I could do about it, until I found the recordings. They were in a storage unit I had kept since leaving the loft, a collection of boxes I could not afford to sort through but could not bear to throw away. Old clothes, old notebooks, old memories of a life that had never really been mine. I was looking for a winter coat when I found the box of tapes. Mini-cassettes, digital files on old hard drives, voice memos on phones I had forgotten I owned. Recordings I had made over the years, not of Julian's music, but of Julian himself. Conversations. Confessions. Moments when he had forgotten to perform, when the mask had slipped, when the man behind the genius had spoken in a voice that was raw and real and mine alone. I spent 3 weeks listening to them. Night after night, in my closet apartment with headphones that blocked out the city, I heard his voice again. Not the voice from the albums, not the voice from the interviews, the voice from our kitchen at 4 a.m., the voice from our bed on Sunday mornings, the voice that had belonged to me even when he had not. And in those recordings I found the truth about Blair, the truth about me, the truth about the words he had taken and the love he had never been brave enough to claim. There was a tape from 6 months before his death. He was drunk or high or simply exhausted from the performance of being Julian Harlow. We were in the loft that was still half mine then, and he was lying on the couch with his head in my lap, and he was talking. "Blair is easy," he said. His voice was slurred, distant, the voice of a man who had forgotten he was being recorded. "She is a vacation from being me. She does not ask me to be deep, she does not ask me to be anything. She is beautiful and she is empty, and that is exactly what I need right now." I had not responded. I remembered the night now, remembered the way my hand had stilled in his hair, remembered the cold that had spread through my chest. I had thought he was tired. I had thought he would come back to me. I had not known that easy and empty were the qualities he valued most. And then, on another tape from 3 months before his death, he said something worse. He was in the studio, working on what would be his final album, and I had brought him coffee, and he had pulled me onto his lap, and he had played me a melody. It was beautiful. It was the melody that would become his biggest hit, the one that would be played at his funeral, the one that Blair would claim as the song he wrote for her. These lyrics, he said, they need something. They need your words, Simone. Your words are the only ones that fit my music. You are the only one who understands what I am trying to say. I had written the lyrics that night. I had given them to him the next morning. And he had taken them, and he had recorded the song, and he had dedicated it to Blair at that party, the party where he had died on the way home. But on the tape, there was more. After I left the studio, after he thought I was gone, he had kept recording. He had played the song again, and he had spoken to the empty room. Simone is my real muse, he said. His voice was clear now, sober, the voice of a man who thought he was alone. She is the only one who sees me, the only one who knows what I am. Blair is a photograph. Simone is the negative. Without her, there is no light. He had known. He had always known. And he had chosen the photograph over the negative. He had chosen the image over the source. He had chosen to die with Blair's name on his lips and my words in his throat. I sat in my apartment, the tapes scattered around me like evidence at a crime scene, and I felt something shift, not grief. Grief had been my companion for 2 years, a heavy, familiar weight. This was something lighter, something sharper, something that felt like the first breath after drowning. I was going to give Blair the memoir she wanted, and I was going to make sure it destroyed her. I did not contact her directly. I created a persona, a ghostwriter highly recommended with a portfolio of celebrity memoirs and a reputation for discretion. I used a fake name, a fake website, a fake history. I reached out to her through her literary agent, offering my services for the book she had been trying to write about Julian. The book that would cement her status as the widow, the muse, the eternal love. She bit immediately. Blair was many things, but patient was not one of them. She had been trying to write the memoir for a year, struggling with sentences that went nowhere, chapters that repeated themselves, a narrative that sounded like a press release because that was the only language she knew. She needed a ghostwriter. She needed someone who could make her sound like the woman Julian had loved, even though she had never been that woman and had no idea what she had sounded like. I met her in a coffee shop, the same coffee shop where I had met Julian 12 years earlier. She did not recognize me. Why would she? I was 34 now, not 22. I wore glasses I did not need, dressed in black that made me forgettable, spoke in a voice that was soft and accommodating and utterly unlike the Simone who had once sung lyrics in a Brooklyn loft. I told her my name was Margaret. I told her I specialized in love stories, in grief narratives, in the kind of memoir that made readers feel they had witnessed something sacred. I showed her samples of my work, chapters I had written in the voices of women who had never existed, stories that were convincing because they were built on the architecture of truth. She hired me on the spot. She wanted the book finished in 6 months, in time for the 3rd anniversary of Julian's death. She wanted it to be a bestseller. She wanted it to be optioned for a film. She told me with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth, to make sure that Julian's legacy was protected, that no one could ever question what they had meant to each other. I smiled back. I understood exactly what she wanted, and I was going to give it to her. The 6 months I spent writing Blair's memoir were the most surreal of my life. I moved into the loft that was now hers, the loft where I had spent 8 years becoming invisible. She gave me the guest room, the room that had been Julian's studio, the room where he had composed the songs that made him famous. His piano was still there. His notebooks were still on the shelves. His presence was everywhere, and Blair moved through it like a tourist, touching things without understanding them, posing for photos in the spaces where real work had happened. I wrote in that room. I sat at Julian's desk, at the piano where he had played my melodies, and I crafted a narrative that was both a love letter and a trap. Every chapter was designed to sound like Blair's voice while containing details that were impossible, references that were coded, truths that were hidden in plain sight. I wrote about their first meeting, the way Julian had supposedly seen her across a crowded room and known instantly that she was the one. I wrote it exactly as he had described seeing me, 12 years earlier, in the coffee shop where I worked. The same words, the same feeling, the same moment stolen and reassigned. I wrote about their creative partnership, how Blair had inspired his final album. I described the process in detail, the late nights, the collaborative energy, the way she would bring him coffee and sit by his side while he composed. I described it exactly as it had happened between us, except I changed the name. I made sure the details were so specific, so intimate, so clearly the product of lived experience, that anyone who had known Julian would recognize the source. And I wrote about the songs. I wrote about the love song of the generation, the wedding anthem, the breakup ballad. I attributed them all to Blair's inspiration, to their love, to the magic they had created together. But in the descriptions, I included lines that were not in the final versions. Lines from my original drafts, from the notebooks Julian had edited, from the poems he had changed without telling me, lines that only the true author would know. Blair read each chapter as I finished it. She never questioned the details. She never asked how I knew the color of Julian's favorite sweater, or the name of the restaurant where they had their first date, or the song that was playing when he proposed. She accepted everything because she had no frame of reference. She had been with him for 6 months. I had been with him for 8 years. She could not tell the difference between memory and invention because she had no memories to compare. She did question one thing. In the chapter about the final album, I had written that Julian sometimes called her by the wrong name in his sleep. Simone, he would murmur, reaching for her in the dark. She crossed it out. That is not true, she said. She was wearing one of my old sweaters, the cream cashmere I had left behind, and she looked like a child playing dress-up. He never called me anything but Blair. I looked at her. I looked at the sweater. I looked at the ring on her finger, the ring that had been meant for me. Are you sure? I asked. My voice was gentle, the voice of a ghostwriter who only wanted to help. Sometimes the sleeping mind reveals truths we do not see when awake. It could be a powerful moment, a vulnerable moment. Readers love vulnerability. She hesitated. I could see her calculating, weighing the value of authenticity against the risk of exposure. In the end, her ambition won. She was, after all, a performer. She understood that vulnerability was currency. Leave it, she said, but make it clear that he was dreaming, that he did not know what he was saying. I left it. I made it clear. And I smiled because the trap was set. The memoir was titled The Light We Shared. It was 347 pages of my words in Blair's voice, my memories in Blair's name, my love story rewritten as a tragedy that belonged to someone else. The publisher loved it. The marketing team loved it. Blair loved it most of all, because for the first time, she had a narrative that made her feel real. That made her feel like the muse she had always claimed to be. The launch was scheduled for the 3rd anniversary of Julian's death. A live event at the studio where he had recorded his final album, broadcast to thousands of fans, promoted as a once-in-a-lifetime celebration of love and legacy. Blair would read from the book. She would answer questions. She would perform the role of the widow one last time, securing her place in the pantheon of tragic romance. I made sure I was running the sound. The night of the event, the studio was packed. Fans, journalists, industry people, the same crowd that had always surrounded Julian, now gathered to honor his memory and celebrate his widow. The air smelled like lilies and expensive perfume and the particular hunger of people who needed to believe in a love story. Blair was wearing white, because of course she was. White for the pure, white for the innocent, white for the lie. She took the stage with a copy of the book in her hands and she began to read. The first chapter was about their meeting. She read my words, my description of Julian seeing her across a crowded room, and she performed them with tears in her eyes. The audience sighed. The cameras zoomed in on her face. I sat in the sound booth, my hand on the mixing board, and I waited. She reached the chapter about the creative partnership. She read my description of bringing him coffee, of sitting by his side, of watching him compose. She read it as if she had lived it, and the audience believed her because they wanted to believe. Then she reached the chapter about the sleeping name. She read the passage where Julian, in the dark, reached for her and murmured another woman's name. She read it with practiced vulnerability, a tear sliding down her cheek, her voice breaking on the words he did not know what he was saying. I pressed the first button. The screens behind her went dark. The audience murmured. Blair turned, confused, still performing her confusion because she did not yet understand that the performance was over. Then the screens lit up with a date. March 15, 3 years earlier. And a voice. Julian's voice, not from an album, from a tape, from the box I had found in the storage unit. Simone is my real muse, the voice said. The studio went silent. She's the only one who sees me, the only one who knows what I am. Blair is a photograph. Simone is the negative. Without her there is no light. Blair's face went white. She dropped the book. She looked at the screens, at the audience, at the cameras, and she saw her narrative cracking open. I pressed the second button. The screens showed a page from my notebook. My handwriting. The original lyrics to the love song of the generation, dated 2 years before Blair met Julian. Beside it, the published version with Julian's name on the copyright. And beside that, an email from Julian to his producer, Simone's lyrics are perfect. Do not mention her in the credits. She prefers to stay behind the scenes. I pressed the third button. The screens showed the recording of the night he died. The party. The dedication. Julian on stage holding a microphone, Blair in the front row. And his words, "This song is for Blair, my light, my inspiration." But the audio continued, the part that had been cut from the live stream, the part where he stepped off stage and said to his manager, "Simone wrote it. Simone writes everything. I am just the voice." I stood up. I walked out of the sound booth. I walked down the stairs, through the silent audience onto the stage. Blair was frozen, the book at her feet, her face a mask of horror that was finally real. I picked up the microphone. I looked at the cameras. I looked at the thousands of people watching, the fans who had loved Julian, the industry who had ignored me, the world that had let me disappear. "My name is Simone," I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice I had found in my closet apartment, in the tapes, in the years of silence. "I am the woman Julian called for in his sleep. I am the woman who wrote the songs you sang at your weddings. I am the woman who gave him 8 years of my life and received in return the privilege of being invisible. And I am here to tell you that the light you shared was never yours. It was mine, and I am taking it back." I looked at Blair. She was crying now, real tears, the tears of a woman who had built a castle on sand and was watching it wash away. "You wanted his legacy," I said. "You wanted his memory. You wanted to be the widow, the muse, the eternal love, and I gave you the book you asked for. Every word in it is true, but the truth is not yours, the truth is mine, and now everyone knows." I walked off the stage. I did not wait for security. I did not wait for applause. I walked through the audience, past the journalists with their cameras flashing, past the fans with their mouths open, out into the November night. The fallout was immediate. The memoir was pulled from publication. Blair's social media accounts were flooded with accusations, her brand destroyed, her foundation dismantled. The publisher issued an apology. Julian's estate was sued by multiple parties, and the songs, my songs, were finally, belatedly, credited to me. But I did not celebrate. I did not read the articles or watch the coverage. I went home to my closet apartment, and I sat with the tapes, and I listened to Julian's voice one last time. And I understood something that I had been avoiding for 12 years. He had loved me. In his way, in his cowardly, performative, incomplete way, he had loved me, but he had never loved me enough to give me his name. He had never loved me enough to share his stage. He had loved me the way you love a secret, a source, a negative that you need but cannot display. And that love, however real, was not enough. It had never been enough. I spent the next month doing something I had never done before. I wrote for myself. Not for Julian, not for Blair, not for an audience that did not know my name. I wrote songs with my own melodies, lyrics that no one else would claim, music that belonged entirely to me. They were not good at first. They were awkward, uncertain, the work of someone who had spent a decade creating in the shadow of another person's light. But they were mine. Every note, every word, every mistake. I recorded them in a small studio, paying for the time with the advance I had received for ghostwriting Blair's memoir. I played them for no one. I kept them on my phone, listening in the subway, in the grocery store, in the moments before sleep, and slowly they became less awkward. Slowly they became songs. 3 months after the launch, I performed one in public for the first time. It was at a small club in Brooklyn, a basement room with 50 folding chairs and a sound system that buzzed. I had put up flyers, or rather, I had paid a friend to put up flyers, advertising an open mic night. I did not use my name. I used a fake one, a stage name, a mask that allowed me to be visible without being fully seen. I played the piano myself badly and I sang. The song was called Negative. It was about the space where light comes from, about being the source that no one photographs, about the courage it takes to stop being the background and start being the picture. When I finished, the room was silent. Then someone clapped, then another. Then the 50 people in the folding chairs were on their feet, and I was standing at a piano in a basement in Brooklyn, hearing my own name, my real name, called out by strangers who had never known Julian and did not care about Blair. A man approached me after the set. He was older, with gray hair and a kind face, and he told me he was a producer. He told me my voice was raw but real. He told me he wanted to hear more. I said I would think about it, and for the first time in 12 years, I meant it. I was not performing accommodation. I was not disappearing so someone else could shine. I was choosing in my own time, on my own terms, what I wanted to do with my voice. I am still thinking about it. I am still writing. I am still learning to be visible, to take up space, to exist in a world that taught me my only value was in making others look brighter. It is slow work. It is hard work, but it is mine. I am Simone. I am 34 years old, and this is not the end of my story. It is the first song I sang in my own name. See you in the next story.